So good morning, everyone. Let's start while we are still waiting for a few more people to join. So my name is Maria Dutarte and I represent the European Patients Academy. I would like to welcome you all to this morning's workshop on good lay summary practice. We have a very interesting interactive program for you, provided by a team led by Ingrid Klingmann from the European Forum for Good Clinical Practice, EFGCP. And without any further ado, I would like to now give the floor to Ingrid, who will introduce today's program for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria, and a warm welcome also from my side. For those who don't know me, but I think there are very few here in the event. My name is Ingrid Klingmann. I'm the chairperson of EFGCP, and I was involved in EUPATI from day one on very intensively, and I'm still involved very much. And therefore, it was one of my first considerations also when we learned about, when we were sure that, in fact, the good lay summary practice would be released, that we thought, okay, we need to talk to our EUPATI fellows and ENPs to make sure that we benefit as much as possible from this real important opportunity to get patient involvement live, so to say, and therefore the program today is about presenting you the good lay summary practice to give you an understanding what that is and why patients and patient organizations have really here a very good opportunity, an important opportunity to help that we get patient involvement, patient engagement a reality. So we will have a few introductions this morning from Solange Corriol-Rouhou from AstraZeneca, and as Lotte Klim has unfortunately had to step out for personal reasons today, I take over for her because we have been working very intensively in this GLSP development together. So I know about all the argumentations and issues and concerns, etc. But what we want to do after this, making you familiar with the facts in GLSP, what is good lay summary practice and why is it there? We would like to discuss in different rounds of discussion or in different sections of discussions what this means for the patient community and what the fellows and the ENPs can contribute, would need to be able to contribute to use this opportunity to get patient involvement in an important part of clinical research established. And there are different colleagues here today who have volunteered to take over this such a discussion topic. So we have Margit Paul from Austria, and also Solange is going to take over one. So that we hopefully will have then a possibility to discuss the different topics with you in detail. And ultimately, as you will hear, the good lay summary practice is now released, but we will also ensure that we continue to work on the implementation. And as you will be an important part of the implementation, we would need to know from you what you would need now in 2022 and probably also 2023 to prepare your environment, to support you in making your community familiar with these opportunities and to enable them to play these roles proactively. So just to explain you the background, that is based on collaboration that EFGCP and FPI had since 2015, where we were talking about this new requirement from the clinical trials regulation that next to, in addition to uploading the summary of results into this new European database, CTIS, there needs to be a lay summary prepared and disseminated as well, or uploaded in CTIS as well. and that nobody was really sure how to do that in practical terms. So after 2 conferences and the first guideline on the content and structure of a lay summary as recommendations, we put then together the roadmap initiative to good lay summary practice. That was a spontaneous initiative with over 60 European and international organizations from all different stakeholders involved joining forces to figure out together, based on experience that is there already, especially in the big companies, and also in guidance that has been worked out in the US, what we would need in Europe to establish a suitable infrastructure for the development and dissemination of good lay summaries that fulfill their let's say, their objective to really increase transparency, improve the information to patients and the public about clinical research results. And therefore, this is a tool that has a lot of potential to be a real game changer if we make something out of it. And based on this work from this roadmap initiative, the guidelines were compiled. There was a big public consultation in 2020, and ultimately the European Commission accepted to work with us on this. They reviewed that intensively. Ultimately, after quite a number of negotiations on content and details of the content, they adopted it and released it now as Commission guidelines on the 4th of October in EUPATI Volume 10. So we have it now as an official public guidance from the European Commission, and we can really use that. So with this, I would like to hand over right away to Solange to give you a concrete understanding what it is, what we are doing, what we are proposing in or recommending in GLSP, and I will then give you some additional thoughts about the role of patients and practical aspects that patients can contribute before we then go into our discussion rounds. So Solange, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you so much, for the opportunity to be with you today, knowing that we have been working together for quite a long time. So you nicely depicted, the journey we have been on since a few years now, and knowing it's always a pleasure to be with you. And I'm glad to see among the participants people I met, in the past, whether through EUPATI or in other situations. So I'm very pleased and honored to tell you a bit more about this good list summary practice, knowing that this was definitely a chance to be in such a multi-stakeholder initiative, which was quite successful. Next one. So this is the usual disclaimer. Next one, please. So why a list summary? So as Ingrid already mentioned, this is something which is included in the European Commission clinical trial regulation, which was released back in 2014. And as you know, we are still waiting for the final implementation of it. And finally, Ingrid mentioned CITES, so this portal, this system, which will allow sponsors to upload on this European system document relating to clinical trials, and in particular results of clinical trials. And indeed, there's a specific article in this regulation which requires sponsors that are performing trials to submit a list summary of the results of the trials, a summary that is understandable to lay person. And CITES, as Ingrid mentioned, finally this European portal, which we have been waiting for years, is expected to go live at the beginning of February, and we will see how, you know, this will be, if it will be fit for purpose, knowing that, and this is something which is not new, since once a trial is completed, the regulation, there's a specific requirement for those trial, you know, completed. For sponsors, there's the need to provide results and a clinical study report within 12 months after study completion, meaning most of the time last patient, last visit. And it's a little bit shorter for pediatric studies. It's only 6 months, and a bit longer for phase 1 trials, knowing that, you know, up to now, those results, you know, there was no obligation to submit the results. So clearly, CITES is expected, I mean, to be the single entry point for those results, meaning that results will be available not only to trial participants, but also to the public at large. Next one. So, less summary, how to do them? Well, clearly, there are already, you know, guidance here and there. And in addition, you know, since the release of the regulation in 2014, experience has been gained since sponsors, even if not all sponsors, but at least most of them, you know, have fulfilled their requirement. And of course, benefiting of these recommendations that, you know, were published here and there, whether in Europe, whether in the US, or also by a consortium such as Transcelerate. Next one. I think it's, yeah, excellent, thank you. So back in 2015, so meaning just after the release of the clinical trial regulation, already EFGCP, together with the pharma industry, FPR, started working together. And you probably remember that at that time, we organized a joint workshop to discuss less summaries. So that was, you know, the first discussion in order to understand what could be the expectation and what could be delivered. And in the meantime, additional interaction, you know, were established, and in particular with the Commission through the clinical trial expert group. And moving forward, there was the release in 2017 of the first guideline by the Commission. And as you can see here, this is, you know, the cover page of this document released in 2017. The first, you know, official document for Europe. Next one. And of course, experience gained, still, you know, some uncertainty, some gaps. So meaning that with experience gained and at the request of Ingrid, EFGCP, we decided, you know, to revisit this activity. And this is the reason why in March 2019, we met to launch the Roadmap Initiative to Good Less Summary Practice, meaning bringing together all the stakeholders to work on, so what's next, knowing that there was already a guidance, the 2017 guidance, and based on the experience at that time. So what to do to revamp those recommendations. So as a result of this first discussion, there was the opportunity to identify 5 different work stream task forces, and all of them were composed of, different people, different stakeholders. And as you can see, different work stream, one looking at the development of the document at large, another one looking at the patient role in the drafting of the list summary, another one at the dissemination, of course, another one looking at studies performed by academia, and finally, a topic close to my heart, list summary for pediatric studies. And moving forward, we explored what could be, the Commission interest with regard to revamping the existing guideline. And finally, moving forward, after lots of work, debate, discussion, knowing that in addition, we were impacted by the pandemic, but still everybody remained engaged. And as Ingrid mentioned, finally, the draft, was released for public consultation. We had the opportunity of back and forth discussion as well with the Commission. And finally, we were quite successful since, we got the blessing from the Commission. And as Ingrid mentioned, in early October, the GLSP document was published and is now included in EUPATI Volume 10. Next one. So this is quite successful. So going back to our objectives, the objectives, more or less the same as, at the time all these, initiatives started. So meaning to create a framework for the planning, delivery, and dissemination of list summary practices, as requested by the clinical trial regulation. And of course, as usual, to create a framework, there are some important, elements that, needs to be considered. And this is why, not only there's a need to be quite good at, providing the right information in a transparent manner, which is, not for, commercial purposes, but also with the opportunity to ensure that the document that is released is fit for purpose, is quite understandable, and has been drafted, with all the important elements, including, of course, patient involvement. And in addition, since trials are conducted, at the global level, there was also the need to consider, well, what about, having it to be used beyond Europe, so that it can be seen as well by patients and the public beyond Europe, meaning that what to do in order to release one global master list summary. Next one. So the scope, well, clearly, despite, the fact that it was, a stakeholder effort, we all agreed on, what would be the intention and the scope of the document, as it is mentioned here on the slide. So not only the need to, of course, fulfill the regulation requirement, but in addition to provide a recommendation on how to enable patient engagement all throughout the list summary process, but also to provide recommendation on how to use trial results and have, them presented as appropriate. with the need, of course, in this exercise to bring in the necessary skills and expertise, and also to consider that, you know, there are specific needs with, you know, special populations such as children. And of course, in the end, the opportunity to share best principles and to have, you know, all this information released in a way which is understandable to the public at large. And we also agree that, of course, there's a difference between a less summary and the summary of, you know, or summaries that could be, you know, included into a publication. And we decided that those, you know, were out of scope. Next one. So this is just to give you a good idea of, you know, what is in this document, which was, you know, published at the beginning of October. So the guideline is quite, you know, a comprehensive document. At the beginning, there's a 10-page quick guide, which is a high-level summary of the key element. Then following this, there's a 44-page handbook providing detailed guidance, including in the end, appropriate references and also in the appendices, additional materials and resources, knowing that, as you know, from the table of contents, you will see that there are 4 main sections. One, it's all about planning, the other one, development, then translation and dissemination. And in the end, it's a comprehensive document, but which is easy to read and navigate, but again, very comprehensive. Next one. And of course, you will see how, you know, it's the result of the work. And it has been quite interesting knowing that having the different stakeholders at the table means different expectation, different agenda, but we can all be very proud of the results since, you know, we finally have this document and it's quite, you know, useful. So planning the list summary, this is, you know, the first chapter. And of course, planning, as usual, is quite important because this is when, you know, we can identify what has to be done. And of course, knowing that we will have to draft more than one list summary, better to identify some standard operating procedures that, you know, will give appropriate direction on how to write, to review and disseminate such document. In addition, quite interesting, of course, in order to ease the process down the route, to develop a general template that, you know, could include some specific graphics and icon. And also something quite important because such a work means the need to plan for budget and resources, including the cost of translation and dissemination. So this is the reason why there's the need to develop a specific strategy for a comprehensive involvement in addition, not only of the relevant experts in this work, but in addition, the involvement of patients in the list summary production. Next one. So what to include in a list summary? Well, if you're looking at, you know, what is in the clinical trial regulation, and in particular its Annex 5, you will see that it only includes, you know, high-level information and just a list of the elements that, you know, have to be included into such document. So nothing nothing more, nothing less, but just, high-level information, the clinical trial identification, the name and the contact details of the sponsor, what the clinical trial is about, the general information, information on the population that was included into the trial, which product, was studied. Of course, a description of the safety, details on the results of the trials, and also, of course, some conclusion about, the outcome of the trial, knowing that a list summary is about one trial. So this is important, to remember. And finally, indication as to whether some follow-up trials are foreseen and where, additional information could be found. Next one. Based on this, it's quite, important at the time to draft such a document to bring together a team with the appropriate skills. So meaning those, that were involved in the trial, having clinical knowledge, scientific knowledge, of course, a good understanding of the guidance on the list summary, but also people with communication skills, having the use of lay language, and of course, since translation is quite important, clearly what to do with this, and whether there's a need to adapt the translation to some cultural needs, here and there, knowing that using graphic could be, of course, of interest, and in particular for trials that were conducted in pediatrics. So there's also the need to consider health literacy and numeracy, knowing that there may be limitation in the audience when the text, will be presented and will be read, by those people. And of course, last but not least, there is also a need, for the sponsors to consider how to involve patients. So I will not, well into this in details, knowing that later there will be more details provided, by Ingrid. Next one. So this is just, of course, to give you a bit of an idea of the challenges we are facing at the time. We have to draft, a list summary. Of course, there is no point as to using scientific language, knowing that we have, to simplify the language and to use a language that is, understandable to a lay person, meaning something which is, fully appropriate for the audience and for the reader, at the end of the process. So as you can see from here, the differences, in between these two different languages. Next one. So this is why, we need to have specialists, experts, in this discussion, and among others, of course, patient involvement is quite key, and of course, at every single step of this process. And Ingrid again, will give you more details about this later, and we will have opportunity to discuss together later today on how the interaction could happen and could be optimized as well. Next one. So it's quite important as well, once the document is being drafted, to pay attention that the content and the presentation of the data is well balanced and strictly not promotional. This is quite important. It's of course also important to draft an appropriate fit-for-purpose list summary, which is attractive for the reader. So there's a need to have it, properly designed, properly drafted, and when graphics, are used, they should be simple, and they should only include one message, per graph. Of course, a need to, once drafted, to have not only an internal review within the company or in academia, but also these people, if you want to have them be good reviewer, there's a need, of course, for them to have been trained and to really understand, what is at stake. So it's quite important. And again, a specific consideration should be given for trials, that were conducted in children, knowing that at the end of the day, the list summary, will have to be used by the kids that, participated into the trials, if, of course, their age, allow them to really understand the document. But of course, in addition, the parents, will have to be involved, and of course will benefit of this document. No need to say that so far the experience with regard to drafting those documents for pediatrics is pretty limited. And you probably remember, Ingrid, that at the beginning of our initiative, when we surveyed sponsors, in fact, we didn't get that many documents. So meaning that there's a gap here, and I do hope that with the guidance, the GLSP, the dissemination of this document, it will be quite interesting, in a few months, years' time, to see whether improvement has been achieved. Next one. So a bit more details, on the content of the document. Well, clearly, I mentioned, of course, there's a need to provide details on the results of the trial, and in particular with regard to, at the minimum, of course, results of the primary endpoint, and of course, if they were included into the trial, results on patient relevant endpoint, which sometimes are used as a secondary endpoint. So this was debated quite a lot with the Commission CTAG, and of course, as usual, a need to find a common agreement. And I guess that with more experience gained, there will be again, the opportunity to update the GLSP, but this will be, for the coming years. Next one. So these are just, some example of, visuals, that could be used in order to provide, information on the trials, the number of participants in the trials, and also the characteristics of those participants. Next one. So translation is clearly a core activity in the provision of the list summaries. At the moment, there is no specific requirement, but clearly what is, in use at the moment is, of course, to translate the list summary in the languages of the trial participants. But as I mentioned previously, translation is, not a simple activity, And in addition, it's quite costly. So this is quite important, and in particular for academia sponsors to consider this activity early in the process so that they can plan, some budget ahead of time. Otherwise, it will be a challenge, at the end of the process. It's, of course, important to consider what was done before and to develop some translation memories for certain languages. Importantly as well, the need to ensure that translations are accurate and in a language that is considered adequate by local readers, knowing that there's a need as well, and this is something I experienced, is to take account as well of cultural differences, knowing that, of course, something which can be said, in Europe, may be perceived differently in other regions, such as, Japan, and even, within Europe, there may be cultural differences, that we need to be taken into account. And this is why, having the patient involved, in this process is quite, important to help, nuance the translation and have it, appropriate the reader. Back translation, this is something that we discussed quite a lot. Of course, as you know, this is something which is already used, in particular at the time, patient-reported outcome are being developed. But this is quite, a complex process. And of course, for those able to do this, okay, let's do it. But clearly, it's not an easy task, knowing that in addition, it's quite costly. Next one. Dissemination. So this is the last, step in the process, and something that, we've debated a lot with the CITEG, knowing that we know that in February, the main dissemination point will be via the European portal, knowing that there will be the need to upload any single list summary into this portal. And clearly, since, the inception of the clinical trial regulations, some sponsors have been used to disseminate list summaries in the absence of the portal. Clearly, there are other dissemination pathways that have been used, and that could be used still, knowing that there are lots of options. Next one. So, option. Direct dissemination, one could say it's quite restricted in a way, since mainly targeting the trial participant. And this dissemination could be done directly to the participant of the trial via the investigator. And of course, knowing that sometimes we may have, difficulties to reach the trial participants, since, some trials may be quite long to complete. And this is why indirect dissemination is, of course, a nice option, which has been used quite, largely up to now, meaning sponsors and companies have been used to post the list summary on a specific website, which is the opportunity to reach out not only to trial participants, but also to the public at large. And this is also the opportunity to provide the list summary in different languages, and of course to reach out to the public beyond Europe. But of course, there's a need to be even more cautious when using those public websites, or a specific website that the company could have been used, so far, knowing that there's a need not to release, there's a need to release a less summary without any promotional content. So this is, of course, quite important. Next one. So to finish off, just to show you a few examples. So these are, examples of thank you letter that are, provided to the study participant, and which, also include, of course, the results of the trial in lay language. And as you can see, dependent on where the trial, was conducted, of course, those, documents are translated in the different languages. So here, as you can see, the study was conducted, in the UK and elsewhere, and English-speaking countries, but there were, sites in Spain. So hence, the two languages that were, used for those less summaries. Next one. So this is another example, quite interesting, that, was drafted and provided by Boehringer Ingelheim as a result, of a study conducted in children with asthma. And as you can see, this is quite an interesting presentation of the results using comics. So this is just, to exemplify what can be done, knowing that it will be quite interesting, as I said, to see moving forward what will be the impact of the GLSP on the drafting of those list summaries, and lots of other, interesting questions to address. How patient involvement can be achieved, whether this could be optimized, how this is working. Well, lots of question, knowing that of course there's still a question mark as to whether the European portal cities will be as well fit for purpose, knowing that we have been waiting for it for quite a long time. So with that said, we are always optimistic, looking at what could be done better and what could be done all together. And with that, thank you for your attention, and on to you, Ingrid. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Solange. That was a brilliant compilation and explanation of what happened, what we did, and where we are now. And I think it pointed very, very clearly to the relevant things that we need to consider in preparing and disseminating this lay summary, and as the basis for what we can do now as patients. Because let's be very clear, we are all talking about the relevance and importance of patient engagement, patient involvement in the medicines development process, but we all know that in reality, this is not happening on a, let's say, broad front. There is more and more goodwill on the industry side, very much less so on academia researcher side. There are a large number of companies who are more and more involved in, or really actively involving patients, but it's not a normal thing. It's still something that we will have to push for and find solutions to make it really, really not only attractive for all partners, but also achieving then really what we want to achieve, which is to develop better treatments for patients in a shorter and more efficient way. And of course, as we have now seen under the corona, especially in the corona period, there is a big change in attitude in the public. Before corona, hardly anybody was interested in clinical research or even in details on results of the clinical research. And that has massively changed when you see all the many people that are nowadays interested in clinical research and discuss the results that they can get hold of. We have here a wide open floor for really improving transparency of valuable clinical research and achieve what we always wanted to achieve. So we have here now a very concrete opportunity in a, let's say, in a limited scope of task to create the environment that provides the patients that are interested, willing, able to contribute, and on the other hand, opening the floor to the researchers on the academia and on the commercial, on the industry side, to get into this collaboration. So this defined task of lay summaries could be a very good opportunity, so to say, a pilot and first step into a much broader understanding and willingness and reality of patients involved in the medicines development process. Because if it becomes clear to all parties involved that this can work and that this is helpful, and what how much better the result is when we collaborate here, then that will be the bridge, so to say, to open the floor to many more areas in the medicines development process. And you all know this famous EUPATI slide with a long arrow and all the different tasks and elements where patients can support this medicines development process. So we are here now at a step where we can turn it into reality at a concrete example. And so I would like to give you now, in a few minutes, some additional ideas, concrete ideas where such collaboration could take place. And then we should, as I mentioned already, start thinking about what concrete steps are required to raise awareness on the patient side in the different countries, in the different communities, how they can prepare what we would need to do to support this preparation, and also how to achieve matchmaking, so to say, and bring the partners together between the industry side and the patients who are able and willing, and patient organizations willing to support that. So next slide, please. Next one. Next one. Okay, you have heard that already from Solange. One of the problems that we are going to face in this topic is that lay summary production and dissemination comes at the very end of the clinical trial process. And it comes at a time where the sponsor has run out of time, because 12 months after last patient, last visit in adult trials, or even 6 months only after pediatric study finishes in the last patient, is an extremely short period for a sponsor to clean the data, to lock the database, to get the statistical results, and then to review the results, to understand the results, to decide on how to present the results, and to produce then ultimately the clinical study report and this what we call technical summary for upload into CTIS. And in parallel with that, we need to, or the sponsor needs to produce the lay summary. It needs to be ready at the same time as the study report, as this technical summary, in its entirety. And there you can imagine towards the end things get really squeezed. So we have a situation where patient involvement is not only an option, but is really an essential part of the recommendation, but we have this time constraint, and therefore we need to figure out what can be done to increase the efficiency of the preparation of these final results and the preparation of the lay summary. Next slide, please. So ultimately, we need to be clear why it was so important that patients are an active, integral part of the lay summary production. First of all, we really need patients not only in preparing, in supporting the preparation of an individual lay summary, but we really need to achieve awareness of patients and the public that there is now for all clinical trials with drugs in Europe, a lay summary. And of course, in our roadmap initiative, we have been promoting from the beginning and will continue to do so, that by calling it good lay summary practice, that this is not only something for drug trials, but for all clinical trials, whatever the topic is. So we hope that we will be able to establish, let's say, an environment where the production or the creation and dissemination of a lay summary becomes standard practice and is a normal thing for every researcher. But of course, on the other hand, it is important that the patient community and the public knows about that, because if nobody is reading them, or if nobody is finding them, then they will not achieve the objective of increased transparency about research. The next thing that we really need to make sure is that the document is suitable for patients, trial participants, and the general public. There are different dangers that could hamper that suitability. On one hand, it is the lingo. So if it's not achieved, that the language is really not anymore scientific language, or jargon, but really a lay language, that it is available in the languages which people are able to read and understand. And if they have vision impairment, that they still can have access to that children understand that information when they were patients in a trial. So that is one aspect, but it is also important that the content is really patient or layperson focused. There is, of course, companies will very carefully have to review the content of these lay summaries, and we have experienced with the patient information sheet that this has become a legal document, because it is very important for the sponsor to make sure that all potential side effects are communicated to the patient, so that he can take that into consideration when he wants to participate, whether he wants to participate in a trial or not. So this review of the content of the lay summary by the legal departments in companies is also going to be the norm, but we really, really need to make sure that it is not primarily going to be a document that fulfills legal requirements, but the purposes or the needs of the patients. So there will be certainly quite a bit of debate about the content and the presentation of the content, and also, as you will see later on, the dissemination, because that is still an open topic. Patients, we all know, can provide unique perspectives that may be different from those of researchers and healthcare providers. And therefore, we need to make sure that the presentation of the results fulfill the needs and the expectations also of the patients on receiving information on their particular areas of interest or needs. Terminology, and we know that there is not only a scientific terminology, but there is also within each disease community, there is a certain type of terminology that people are used to use when they are talking together about their disease. So this type of familiarity with the terminology should be enabled by a lay summary as much as possible. And what will be a big issue to solve, and there we have not yet good solutions or good proposals. This is the access to this lay summary and the suitability of the dissemination. What the clinical trials regulation says is it has to be uploaded in CTIS, and CTIS is publicly accessible. But there are, of course, first of all, the question will be, how user-friendly is this database going to be? How easy will it be to find what people are looking for? How will people know that this lay summary is now available there? Because let's be clear, some studies are, quite a large number of studies are running over several years, and patients who have been enrolled in the beginning of the study recruitment period are finished with the study, and the study is continuing. So it may well be that last patient, last visit is years after an individual patient has left the study. So how would he know that this lay summary is now available? Would he even still be interested, etc.? So this dissemination topic is a big practical aspect that we need to find better solutions. And you will find not so much in the GLSP recommendations, practically only mentioning what Solange explained as direct dissemination, because the whole topic of indirect dissemination through databases, different databases, was too unclear and undefined and insecure for the European Commission. So they insisted not to give recommendations on that part. So we will still need to discuss quite a bit on how to enable suitable dissemination of these lay summaries to our patients and the public. Next slide, please. Of course, for the different tasks, as you are all very much aware, EUPATI has defined the different categories for of patients and their expertise. And as you can imagine, for the different tasks in the lay summary, planning, development, translation, and dissemination, we will need patients with different levels of expertise. So the EUPATI definitions were taken here as the basis. Next slide. Next slide, please. This is the overall flow, how this GLSP recommendations are built. So planning phase, development phase, translation, and dissemination phase. This is, to say, the guidance figure through this document. For each phase, there is, or for each phase in this process, there are descriptions in the document on what needs to be done, what can be done, and what is ultimately what should come out of this very concretely. Next slide, please. And exactly matching that presentation is a focus on the topic, what and when can patients contribute to that process? So in the planning process, we have especially advice on selection of patient-relevant secondary endpoints, for example, or on the dissemination strategy, but this is the advice for the planning. In the development, we have, of course, a number of areas where patients can actively contribute, of course, in the role of an advisor. Nevertheless, we are also questioning whether patients, or recommend also to think about whether patients cannot be co-author of the lay summary. But here we have, of course, also especially in the second part of the recommendations in the handbook and the annexes, a lot of very concrete proposals and ideas. On the translation process, this is going to be particularly relevant for enabling access to that information in all countries, in all the languages, always taking into consideration, first of all, that there is no definition on translation needs in the regulation. And secondly, as this is really at the end of the process, the amount of work and the amount of budget that is available for the translation is questionable, and we need to really work on making sure that this occurs in the most efficient but also most reliable way for patients, because that's a crucial point in giving the large number of people access to that information. And last but not least, there is a lot what patients can do to help with meaningful dissemination to this patient community of who is interested in that result, but also to the public, and using these opportunities to raise awareness of clinical research and the relevance of the results. Next slide, please. So some principles when patients get involved. First of all, the sponsor has to think about how to approach patient involvement altogether, because there are different possibilities to just do everything with one patient, so to say, or to involve different patients with different level of expertise for the different tasks, or even as a focus group meeting for the same task. There is also something that the sponsor has to think about: the different disease stages from which the patients should come from, age, scientific knowledge, but also translation or dissemination skills. Now, it's also important sometimes to manage expectations. So we have made very clear also in the recommendations that involving patients does not mean that there is a patient representativeness achieved. That is certainly a too high ambition in that short period of time that is available for that process. So, but this has to be accepted. This is okay. That is much better than nothing. So, but this is a caveat that we really have to be, that we have to openly communicate. It's also the question for a sponsor whether he wants to involve a patient organization or working with an individual patient, and especially also for the pediatric contributions. There are networks of young persons that provide advice, but it is also, let's say, an alternative to involving a patient organization versus an individual patient. Next slide. Now, what can patients concretely contribute to the planning of the lay summary? Next slide. So, as you have heard, there is a big discussion about what should be presented. It's clear the primary endpoint, there is no doubt about. But the regulation is not very specific, just talking about the overall results of the study. And also already in our workshops in 2015 and 2017, there was a long debate about which information, especially in the secondary objectives, should be provided to patients or not. Some patient representatives said at these occasions they want to see everything so that they can decide themselves what is relevant for them. On the other hand, there is a limit to the number of explanations that you can give in a document that should be short, attractive, and readable. So we have here clearly some conflicts that have to be taken into consideration and decided in each case. Now, there is an EMA question and answer document on this question on presenting secondary endpoints, yes or no. And this Q&A document says that patient-relevant secondary endpoints should be presented, but there is no definition anywhere what patient-relevant really means. So that needs to be decided, so to say, upfront by the sponsor, together with patients, ideally, on what is really relevant for patients in this clinical trial. Then also the question in which languages should the lay summary be translated. The minimal requirement that has been agreed within the GLSP is that it should be the languages that exist, in which exists the patient information sheet. But of course, is it fair that only patients who in those countries that participated in the trial have access to that information, taking into consideration that most of the trials take place in Western European countries, for example? So should there be other translations? How to ensure that patients and the public are made aware of the lay summary availability. I mentioned that already. Is CTIS as a source of information, so to say, sufficient? What else would and could be done in a particular situation? Should the lay summary really be disseminated beyond the upload in the CTIS? And if yes, in which ways? And as I mentioned, should patients be co-authors of the lay summary? Next, please. The planning and preparation of the involvement, therefore, needs to start early on the sponsor side, but also on the patient side. because if there is nobody that the sponsors can find to help them in a professional, meaningful, efficient way, then we will not see a big change in the situation of patient involvement in principle. So both sides need to prepare, and there needs to be a clear understanding which level is mostly suitable for which task. On that EUPATI has worked already, but also the lay summary is giving very concrete recommendation what level should be provided. But again, on the other hand, the patient community needs then to provide these different expert levels to offer resources for the sponsors here. The lay summary planning, including translation, is recommended to start really in parallel with the preparation of the patient information sheet. Because that's similar terminology, it's the same audience that is addressed. There are the language issues, it's the lay language that is required. And if it's happening at this stage, then the preparation of the lay summary can already be prepared, so to say, in its key structure and with the core information as introductory comments, because that is what we do in the patient information sheet anyway already. And also the dissemination needs to be needs to start its planning really early on, because there may be a need for quite a bit of preparatory work to prepare the ground for availability and efficient dissemination to those in need for that information. Next slide. Contributions to the development of the lay summaries. Next slide. That is, on one hand, certainly a lot about the format. At the moment, or the CTIS portal allows PDF file formats. But the question is, are these suitable for prints? How do figures and also cartoons perhaps appear in what is uploaded there? Is that attractive? Is that user-friendly? It does not allow to include videos and animation, which is certainly a big weakness. So the question is really, what else would we need to do in addition to PDF of a lay summary? Then also, especially for the pediatric environment, videos and animations are a very important part. So there might be a need for separate dissemination that would still have to be prepared. And Solange mentioned already one of the key, let's say anxiety, I don't want to call it anxiety, but concerns of the European Commission is that sponsors would do a type of cherry picking, which trials they would present in lay summaries, in this way disseminated or in that way disseminated, and therefore the recommendations propose that the sponsor develops a company-wide policy on how to disseminate lay summaries in that organization. And then this is upfront and is valid for all type of studies, and then the sponsor cannot be accused of cherry picking. And whatever we present needs to be suitable for patients with impaired vision. Next slide. And then comes the review process, and that is probably a key area for patient involvement, because there's on one hand the master lay summary that needs to be reviewed. Also the user testing and readability of the master lay summary needs to be enabled. Then comes the translation, but especially then the review also of the lay summary in national language and its readability and suitability in national language will require patient involvement. And for these different activities, we need clearly people with different level of expertise, because especially the user testing should be done by research naive patients with different educational backgrounds, different literature experience, age and gender. Next slide. Translation contribution. Next slide. Here it is very important in the review part of the translation that the native terminology and known or familiar presentation of issues are enabled in the respective national languages. And therefore, it's important that patients with a respective disease who are aware of the national terminology and cultural expressions review these translations that are usually done by a translation office, where the translators may not be so familiar with these particularities. But if the lay summary is not really attractive to people, if they do not feel really comfortable with that document, they will not read it. And therefore also the user testing by research naive patients in this country or in native language is really absolutely important. Next slide. And then last but not least, the contributions to the dissemination. There we really need the patient community and patients' insight on the local dissemination options in the different countries, and they are very different in the different countries. Also insight in local norms of what is acceptable across the different channels of communication. When we think about social media, when we think about public websites, when we think about company websites, there are different attitudes in all countries, and we do not want to get into any type of, let's say, political debates here. We want just to make sure that people get access to these lay summaries where they can find them. And of course, insight in most efficient local dissemination strategies and pathways to patients with a disease and the public can benefit from patients' input, because they know what patient organizations are there, how to reach the different communities in concrete terms. And also they have connections to relevant local dissemination options and therefore can be extremely helpful to support here the sponsor. Next slide. So that was it. Thank you for your attention. This was only, as I said, the first step, and we would very much hope that we can continue the discussions, considerations, brainstorming, and then developing also concrete strategies and action plans, so to say, to get this going in the foreseeable future. If you have any further ideas, please share them. I would say first send them to Ingrid Heine, and she will, because you all have her address for sure. You can of course also send them directly to Solange or myself or Maria. But I think it would be great then that we collect all your also additional ideas, and we will in our roadmap initiative start especially then in the beginning of the new year, to make concrete plans on the things that we can do, that we can afford with our limited capacities and capabilities. But based on the information we got today and the ideas, I think it will be easier for us to decide on priorities and find an efficient way then to get this implemented. So we will definitely get back to you on that and keep you up to date, and also ask you for further support in helping us driving that forward. So thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch if you deserve it, and the weekend, and talk to you soon, hopefully.